February 25th, 2009. Turkish Airlines Flight 1951, a Boeing 737 with 135 people on board, is about to land at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport after an uneventful flight from Istanbul, Turkey. The crew will be performing a slam dunk approach into Schiphol Airport and is intercepting the ILS from above. The pilots must decelerate the plane and have it descend at the same time in order to intercept the ILS. Only a mile from the runway and at an altitude of 460 feet, the stick shaker activates and the captain realizes his airspeed is dangerously low. The captain takes control of the airplane, but it is too late. The plane collides with the ground, killing 9 people on board. Why did Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 fall out of the sky? Was there an ongoing issue that needed to be addressed? Find out on this episode of Black Box Down. Hello everyone, welcome to Black Box Down. It's Gus and Chris. Hi Chris.
Hello Gus. And people listening.
Hello everyone listening. We're here talking about another incident, another thing we're going to dive into. We're talking about slam dunk approaches again, Chris. We talked about this once before with the Asiana flight in San Francisco. Well, they're back.
Mm-hmm. And we have a good visual representation and aviation explanation, a little animated series we have.
Our animated series, plug in our animated show. You check it out on our YouTube channel over at Black Box Down. And of course, as always, you can follow us on social media at Black Box Down Pod on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, to get images and just kind of see things that maybe we talk about that are hard to visualize.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said before, Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 was a passenger flight flying from Istanbul, Turkey to Amsterdam, Netherlands, February 25th, 2009. So not terribly long ago. Oh, almost exactly 13 years ago from when we're taping this.
Whoa.
The flight was crewed by Captain Hasan Tahsin Arasan, who was 54 years old, had about 17,000 flight hours. He was one of the airline's most experienced pilots, and he was also acting as an instructor on this flight. The first officer was Murat Sezer, who was 42, had about 4,146 hours. He needed to gain experience on this route, was flying under supervision. And since it was a training flight, there was also a third pilot in the cockpit named Olgay Osgur, who was 28, had 2,126 hours. And he was acting as a safety pilot on this flight, sitting in the jump seat. So basically, since there was training going on between the two pilots, the third pilot sits there and acts as a safety pilot just to keep an eye on everything to make sure nothing's being missed because there's instruction going on.
Yeah. Always have backups.
Always. If there's anything we learned about doing this podcast in aviation is that everything has a backup except for the MCAS system on the Boeing 737 MAX. They fixed that. That's different now. So the aircraft used was a 7-year-old Boeing 737. There were 4 flight attendants and 128 passengers on board. So just for, I know I made a joke there. Just for clarity, this was not a MAX. The MAX is newer. The MAX did not exist back in 2009 when this incident happened. I want to say this was I believe this was 737-800 next generation.
That's some Star Trek name.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. The next generation's been around in regards to the 737's been around for a while. Because like we've talked about, the 737 has had a very long operational history. So there have been many iterations of it throughout history. And the 737, as we know it today, bears very little resemblance to the 737 that first flew, almost 50 years ago now, I guess.
Dang.
Anyway, we're going to tangent. Flight 1951 took off from Istanbul at 8:23 a.m. Turkish time and started making its way into Amsterdam. The first officer started the approach briefing at 9:53 a.m. while cruising at flight level 360. The crew listened to the ATIS for Schiphol Airport, determined they would be using runway 18 right. Visibility would be dropping from 3,500 meters to about 2,500 meters, which is about 2 nautical miles to about 1.3 nautical miles. They'd be making an ILS approach, and the decision height for a go-around would be 200 feet. And we've talked about this many times in the past. ILS approach just means they're using that glide slope system that lets them know if they're on the appropriate path to come in and intercept the runway and land safely. So even if they can't see, even if the visibility is really bad, they can still fly in on the ILS approach and still land safely.
Yeah. Fly blind if needed be.
Yes. That's not the case here. Visibility was going down, but they still could see. So the crew contacted Amsterdam Area Control at 10:04 a.m. They were given some heading and speed instructions. At 10:15, the crew contacted Schiphol Approach, reported they were descending to 7,000 feet at a speed of 250 knots. They were then instructed to fly to a specific beacon, and I say specific beacon because I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm going to try. Spiekerbor Beacon.
That was it's a valiant effort regardless.
Apologies if you're from the Netherlands and you know how to actually pronounce that. So they were instructed to fly to that beacon and to descend to 4,000 feet. During this instruction, the flight was descending from 8,400 feet and an audio warning regarding the landing gear could be heard. The warning continued for about 90 seconds before it was stopped, and the captain made the remark, Radio Altimeter. We'll get into what that means a little further, because that's kind of important.
Okay.
At 10:17, the warning activated again for 2 seconds, and then about 90 seconds later, it went off for 2 seconds again. The crew were then instructed to descend to 2,000 feet and to fly in a heading of 265 degrees. At 10:22, when the crew reached 2,000 feet, they set the flaps to flaps 1, and a speed of 195 knots was selected via the mode control panel, with the auto throttle being in mode control panel speed. So they're, we've talked about the different autopilot modes and the things that can be done. So they're trying to manage the plane coming in on the glide slope. Since they're doing this slam dunk approach, what they're doing is they come in above the ILS and then they kind of drop down into the ILS from above instead of intercepting it from below. Like you can imagine the ILS is like almost like a triangle shooting out from the end of the runway. Like one point is the touchdown point, and then there's like an upper and a lower limit that shoot out.
Oh, okay.
Most of the time, typically, a plane will intercept that bottom arc. They'll intercept it from the bottom and then hit the glide slope. In this slam dunk approach, they're coming above the top line and then dropping into the glide slope.
Okay. So so there's like kind of a higher and lower limit you can enter from, and as long as you hit that like line by a certain altitude.
Exactly. And they're approaching it from the top. And that's what's going on. They're descending and lowering their speed to intercept that ILS from the top. So the crew were then instructed to turn left to 210 degrees. And at this time, the crew attempted to engage the second autopilot for a dual channel approach, but this resulted in the right autopilot disconnecting and the left autopilot did not engage. The crew then re-engaged the right autopilot and left the left one alone. At 10:23, they selected flaps 5 and selected a speed of 170 knots. 9 seconds later, the audio warning regarding the landing gear could be heard again for 5 seconds. And just for clarity, this warning that's going off, it's warning them that the plane thinks that the landing gear should be lowered. So what they're doing is they're kind of silencing it. Every time it goes off, they're just silencing the alarm. They're not actually lowering. Up until this point, they had not lowered the gear.
And why is it going? Is it going off prematurely?
Yes, it is going off prematurely.
And we don't know why yet?
Do we know why? I haven't explained it yet, but this is definitely a clue that we're going to dive into a little later. So that's the alarm that's going off. But finally, at this point, they go ahead and lower the landing gear, and they select a speed of 160 knots and flaps 15. And then a minute later, they intercept the localizer, and the plane started to automatically follow the signal and turn towards the runway. So now at this point, they've intercepted that glide slope, and they're in the ILS approach.
Okay. So at this point, everything is good to go. Presumably.
Yes. They were above the glide path at 2,000 feet when this happened, and the speed was 175 knots, but decreasing, and they were about 5.5 nautical miles out. The crew selected a lower altitude and another mode for the vertical flight path in order to let the aircraft descend. First, they selected 1,200 feet, and then 10 seconds later, 700 feet. They also changed the vertical speed mode to descend 1,400 feet per minute. And this caused the auto throttle to set the thrust levers to the idle position. So, the challenge is, of course, they're coming down, right, because they want to land, but they want to make sure that their speed doesn't increase too much. So, we've talked about this in other episodes. They want to make sure the nose is kind of up and that they're coming down at an acceptable rate. And they change the vertical speed mode to descend 1,400 feet per minute, which is, a little fast, but it's still, fine.
Okay.
But when they do this, like I said, the auto throttle goes down to idle because, again, they don't want to be speeding up. But little spoiler for what's coming up, the thrust levers should not be at idle at this point.
Are they not as fast as they think they're going?
Well, they're definitely about to be going a lot slower than they realize. So at 10:24, the safety pilot remarked that the radio altimeter had failed, and the captain confirmed this. So there's a couple of different ways that planes can convey or can figure out what their altitude is. There's like, an old style gauge, just, you input what the air pressure is, and then it, based on the external air or the pressure outside the plane, it knows what the altitude is.
Okay.
It's a very old system, and you have to constantly adjust it for whatever the outside air pressure is to calibrate it to make sure it's right.
And is it the altitude relative to sea level or ground?
Yes, relative to sea level.
Okay, so you have to know what the ground level is on where you're landing. Okay.
Correct. And then the second way, the more advanced way, is the radio altimeter, which is what they're talking about here. There's antenna on the bottom of the plane. There's 4 of them. 4 antenna on the bottom of a plane that shoot out a radio signal. It hits the ground, bounces back, another antenna receives the signal and then calculates how long it took, and it can tell you exactly how far down the ground is.
Ooh, yeah.
Much more precise, works instantaneously.
And does that factor in weather? Could that interfere? Say if there's
Nah.
Okay.
But if you've heard recently here in the United States, there's been a lot of uproar about 5G cell phone signals interfering with airplane operations. It's because of radio altimeters.
Oh.
I don't know that it's happened necessarily, but in theory, the 5G band of cell phone networks is very close to the band that radio altimeters operate in. So theoretically, if there's a 5G tower near an airport, it could interfere with a radio altimeter.
Is that why they tell you to put your phones in airplane mode?
Not necessarily. This is a more recent thing with the 5G rollout. The turning your phone off, I mean, that's debatable. We could probably do a whole episode about that, honestly.
We should.
We should. That's a good idea. But not specifically. This is more recent with the 5G rollout. Anyway, all of this is just to say that the radio altimeter had failed on this flight. The safety pilot notices and the captain confirms, yep, you're right, the radio altimeter is not working. And like I said, there's 4 antennas. 2 that send the signal and 2 that receive the signal. One of those feeds the captain's instrument. The other one feeds the first officer's instruments. So the radio altimeter that feeds the captain's instruments had failed.
Okay.
And that they confirm it at this point.
But the other one,
the one for the first officer, was working fine.
Yeah. Okay. So did they switch? Or I guess they don't switch. They could just look at both of them? Or how does it work? Do you see both of them at once?
You're asking good questions. So if the captain looks at the instrument in front of him, it said his altitude was -8 feet, which is not correct. When you're on the ground, the radio altimeter, I believe the spec is for this plane, it's supposed to read between -4 and -6 feet. -8 feet is not unusual if you're on the ground, but it's not within the standard spec. So the radio altimeter on the captain's side was saying he was on the ground, which is obviously wrong. They would have to rely on the radio altimeter operating on the first officer's side. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, there should be backup gauges that use the old style, like I was talking about, that measure air pressure and show your altitude above sea level.
Okay.
Anyway, all of that aside, they intercepted the glide path at an altitude of about 1,300 feet. The captain made the 1,000-foot call out and flaps 40 was selected. At 10:25 at an altitude of about 800 feet and a speed of 144 knots, the captain started running off items on the landing checklist for the first officer to confirm. Before the last item on the checklist was completed, the captain made the 500-foot call out and asked for the safety pilot to alert the cabin crew to take their seats and put on their safety belts. The aircraft flew below 500 feet at a speed of 110 knots. At 460 feet, the stick shaker activated and the safety pilot warned the others about the low airspeed. The thrust levers were immediately moved forward about halfway, but were immediately pulled back to idle by the auto throttle.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, you know where this is going already. We've done enough of these. The captain then declared he had control of the aircraft and the speed was now 107 knots. So they're getting super dangerously slow. The nose was about 12 degrees up and the safety pilot pointed out the speed 2 more times. 3 seconds after the stick shaker went off, one of the pilots deactivated the auto throttle with the lever still in the idle position.
No. So,
Yeah, 1 second later, at an altitude of 420 feet, the autopilot was deactivated and the control column was pushed forward. The stick shaker stopped briefly, but then reactivated with a pitch at 8 degrees down. 9 seconds after the first stick shaker activation, the thrust levers were pushed forward to their maximum position.
So they know they're too slow.
They know they're too slow.
Yeah, they're like...
It still took 9 seconds for thrust to be put to max power. They're at 460 feet above the ground, and it took 9 seconds. That's an eternity.
Like counting 4.
Yeah. It's a long time. And they try, they put the levers halfway up for some reason, but the auto throttle pulled them back. Like, they need to have had their hand on the throttle, push forward, and holding onto it to make sure it's forward. Anyway, at this point, the ground proximity warning system started going off, and a sink rate warning followed by pull-up alerts followed. The aircraft then hit the ground in a field about 0.8 nautical miles from the runway threshold.
So pull up so that they aren't nose down? Or because wouldn't that stall them more if they pulled up?
So they have conflicting things they need to do here. They're going to hit the ground, so they need to pull up, but they're going to stall, so they need to nose down. There's no winning at this point. Normally if you're stalling, you got to trade altitude for airspeed.
Yeah.
But when you're this low to the ground, you have no altitude to trade.
So yeah, you're at this point, they had to the best thing to do is just level out and hit hard. Right?
I guess. The best thing to do is to not get here. But yeah, when they did impact the ground, their nose was pointed 22 degrees up and they were banked 10 degrees to the left. So they were trying to pull up, but they had no speed. There was no power. The recording equipment stopped at 10:26 and 2 seconds, 15 seconds after the first stick shaker activated. The aircraft broke into 3 sections on impact.
Dang.
The 3 pilots, 1 flight attendant, and 5 passengers were killed in the accident.
All 3 pilots?
Mm-hmm.
I would think the people in the back of the plane would have been safer because you said they hit the bottom of the plane first, right?
Yeah, but I mean, think
Or
about
back
it.
of
There's a lot of structural pieces in that part of the plane that hold it together.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's rigidity there for the fuel tanks and for cargo and just for safety purposes. Once you're out at the front of the plane, you're kind of on the fringe of all of that.
Oh.
However, that being said, 117 passengers and 3 flight attendants suffered injuries and 6 passengers were not injured. So quite a few people were able to walk away from this incident with injuries, most of them, but still, they did survive. The investigation was carried out by the Dutch Safety Board, and they found, like we said, there was an issue with the radio altimeter system on this aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
The radio altimeter system on the 737 has 2 autonomous systems, like I said, a left system and a right system, one side for the captain, one side for the first officer. Each system consists of separate transmit and receive antennas that are linked to a computer by cables. And the height values originating from the left and right systems are displayed on the left and right flight displays, respectively, if these values are anywhere between -20 and 2,500 feet. So that's one thing I didn't mention earlier. It only works, it doesn't work at high altitude because then the signal can't reach all the way down. So that's why they use it at about, like I just read, from about 2,500 feet down. That's when it's most important anyway, when you're landing and taking off. When you really need that precision as to how far you are from the ground.
Yeah.
The radio altimeter computer continuously transmits signals to the ground via the transmit antennas, and the reflected signals are detected by the receive antennas. The radio altimeter computer calculates the height of the aircraft above the ground based on the shortest time required. The radio altimeter system is calibrated such that when an aircraft's main landing gear touches the runway during landing, the readout height is 0 feet. When the aircraft is on the ground, with the nose wheel on the ground, the valid values are, like I said earlier, -2 to -6 feet. The Dutch Safety Board discovered during the approach, the left radio altimeter system suddenly indicated an erroneous height of -8 feet on the primary flight display. In reality, the height of -8 feet cannot occur, but the value itself is within the design range of the system. So like I said, it's not normal, but it's not necessarily broken.
Mm-hmm. But it's broken if it's happening in the air.
Yes, correct. You are correct. Yeah, I would just say like -8 would not be broken if they were on the ground. But in the air, absolutely, yeah, something's wrong. Have you ever read the back of a bottle of body wash or shampoo or something and just seen a whole bunch of ingredients you don't recognize and probably can't pronounce? Doesn't that feel a little suspicious? If you care about what goes on your body, try Native Personal Care products. Every Native product is thoughtfully formulated to keep you feeling and smelling fresh all day long. Native is best known for their aluminum-free deodorant. Instead, it's made with ingredients you recognize like coconut oil, shea butter, baking soda. If you still haven't tried Native deodorant, here's a cheat sheet. It offers 24-hour odor protection, a smooth, residue-free application, naturally derived ingredients, and comes in over 10 cents. I'm really picky. This is a little bit of trivia about me. I'm really picky about my deodorant. I have to be really careful, and I have to use deodorants like this. I have bad reactions lots of times to some other kinds of deodorants that have weird ingredients in them. This one, all their ingredients are super simple. And for me, for my body, it works great. My body doesn't complain when I put it on. I think it works amazingly, and I have to be very selective about it. So if it's good for me, it's probably good for you too. So smell and feel fresh all day long with Native. Get 20% off your first order by going to nativedeo.com/blackboxdown or use promo code blackboxdown at checkout. That's nativedeo.com/blackboxdown or use promo code blackboxdown at checkout for 20% off your first order. Spring is just around the corner. It's finally time to actually enjoy being outside again. My favorite thing to do in the great outdoors is to hang out with my friends around a fire pit, except for the horrible smoke. But thanks to Solo Stove's smokeless fire pits, I don't have to worry about that anymore. I've been using my Solo Stove for a while now. It's really a great way, to hang out. I use it in my backyard, honestly, for me. But it's a great way for me to enjoy being out in my yard on those cool evenings that we have right now without getting too chilly because I've got a little fire in front of me. And the best part is it's not blowing smoke all over me and making me stink like smoke when I'm done. I love it. I use it all the time now, actually. I can't say enough good things about it. So it's getting warm again, so what better time is there to upgrade your backyard with a Solo Stove fire pit? It's a perfect way to get outside, spend more time with the people you love. Solo Stove fire pits are brilliantly engineered. They're made with a premium grade 304 stainless steel and 360-degree airflow system that maximizes efficiency while minimizing smoke. They're easy to light with a few bits of starter. Your fire will be blazing in minutes. So shop now, get up to 30% off fire pits all month long, and use promo code BlackBoxDown at checkout to get an extra $20 off, plus a lifetime warranty and free 30-day returns. Just go to solostove.com. Remember, you get $20 off when you use promo code BlackBoxDown. Guess what? Cryptocurrency isn't the secret or exclusive club that it seems it is. It's because Coinbase believes everyone, everywhere should be able to get their foot in the door. So whether you've been trading crypto for years or just getting started, Coinbase can help. Coinbase offers a trusted, easy-to-use platform to buy, sell, and spend cryptocurrency. They support the most popular digital currencies on the market. They make them accessible to everyone. They offer portfolio management and protection, learning resources, and a mobile app so you can trade securely and monitor your crypto all in one place. Millions of people in over 100 countries trust Coinbase with their digital assets. Whether you're looking to diversify or just getting started or searching for a better way to access crypto markets, start today with Coinbase. I think it's super simple to use. I love the mobile app. I look at it all the time. It makes it really easy to track my different investments, how everything's doing. I look at it a lot. It's absolutely great. I can have a little widget on my phone so it keeps track of it. It's great. I love it. So for a limited time, new users can get $10 in free Bitcoin when you sign up today at coinbase.com/blackboxdown. Sign up at coinbase.com/blackboxdown for $10 in free Bitcoin. This offers for a limited time only, so be sure to sign up today. That's coinbase.com/blackboxdown. So when all this was going on, the auto throttle, so we know obviously in what we're talking about so far, the auto throttle was kind of messing with them because it kept pulling back to idle.
Were they in the wrong mode? Autopilot mode again? Is that?
Kinda. So yeah, you've learned a lot. You've learned a lot, Chris. So that's what happened with the Asiana flight that we talked about before. So what happened here is the auto throttle entered a mode called retard flare mode. So in order for this to happen, there's a few conditions that have to be met. You know, a lot of these systems, it's all logic based, like if this, then this. And in the case of this retard flare mode, there had to be a couple of conditions that were all true in order for that mode to engage. Those conditions are radio height lower than 27 feet. You caught it already, didn't you? Flap position is more than 12.5 degrees. A speed mode of the auto throttle is active, like mode control panel speed, which was active, and the aircraft is not climbing or descending to a selected altitude or does not maintain a selected altitude. So if you remember what I said earlier, you already remember, I could tell.
Yeah.
Right before the auto throttle went idle, the crew selected a vertical speed mode to descend at 1,400 feet per minute. At the same time, the right-hand autopilot, which used data from the right-hand radio altimeter, was following the glide slope signal, which caused the aircraft to trim nose up during final approach. So all of this to say, the auto throttle thought they were about to touch down and land because it was getting data from the left-hand side, which was reading -8 feet. Their flaps were down past 15. They didn't have a target altitude set in their autopilot. So the auto throttle assumes, oh, we're about to land. So it does, when the planes are about to touch down, they do what's called a flare, where they like nose back and allow the main landing gear to touch down. So I'm sure if you've seen a plane land, like the nose is always up a bit. The main gear touches down and then the nose comes down. When they're doing that, typically the throttle's at idle and they're just allowing the plane to come down and kiss the runway. So the auto throttle thought they were in that state, that they were about to touch the runway. So it's like, throttle needs to be idle, and it kept going back to idle.
And is that why they end up going back first, like with the back of the plane hitting the ground? Because it's trying to...
Right, yeah. It's nosed up. I think by that point, the pilots were also trying to pitch up anyway to not hit the ground.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they were already probably pitched up to begin with, and yeah, that is why the back of the plane hits first. So it turns out there actually had been a history of issues with the radio altimeter in this airline and in others. And on top of that, Boeing and the FAA were aware this was an issue.
Oh.
Despite the fact that Boeing and the FAA had been aware for many years that the radio altimeter system was causing problems and affecting operations of other systems, the situation was not designated a safety risk.
How?
That's an excellent question, Chris. Reports of problems with the radio altimeter system that could not be resolved by Boeing justified an effort to analyze the radio altimeter system and other related systems. Boeing and the FAA could have recognized the fact that problems caused by radio altimeter system, especially the potential for activating the auto throttle retard flare mode, posed a safety risk. Most of the problems regarding the radio altimeter system were not reported, and the board believes that if the manufacturer had received more reports, then Boeing might have recognized the need for renewed analysis of the system. In fact, Turkish Airlines itself had attempted to resolve the problems through discussions with Boeing and the manufacturer of the radio altimeter system antenna, but the issue was never resolved. Like I said, they had ongoing issues. Even in this plane specifically, they tried many things to try to resolve it. They'd swap the computers out, put more shielding on the cabling, swapped out the actual antennas themselves, but it just kept recurring. And until the accident, combating the problems with the radio altimeter systems was primarily aimed at suspected moisture effect, corrosion on the antenna and connectors. They installed gaskets and moisture-proof wraps. And it did contribute in all probability to preventing corrosion, but it couldn't prevent the occurrence of these erroneous radio altimeter heights.
And once they messed up, did they continue to mess up, or was it like they just occasionally?
It was like intermittent, and they would try things to fix it, then it would start working, and then all of a sudden it would stop. It's just like, it's like when you take your car to the mechanic and you complain about something, and then like it doesn't act up in front of them, and they're like, yeah, it's fine. And then you drive it away, and then it instantly starts doing it again. It's like that kind of thing. And at this point, they knew that replacing the antennas generally resolved the problem, but there was no permanent solution. It would still eventually break again, and they'd have to do something to try to figure it out. Pilots were not informed of the problems because the problems within Turkish Airlines were considered to be a technical problem and not a threat to safety. This also appeared to be the case with other airlines from which information about the radio altimeter system was requested. I think the argument they would have made here about why it wasn't a safety issue is that in their minds, it's very obvious when it's wrong. If you look at your instrument and it says -8, you're like, well, that's not right.
Yeah.
And, you pay more attention and fly it manually yourself. And again, it's not something that's used for the entire flight. You come into land, once you're below 2,500 feet, you look at it, you're like, well, radio altimeter's out again. Guess we're going to do this by hand.
Yeah. Is there not a method to like shut that one off and make sure all the autopilots and computers are accessing the data from the other one?
Yes, that is another solution, to use another one that's working. But obviously they didn't do that here.
So there is that like, you can tell the computer, don't use this one, use this one.
Well, like I mentioned very briefly, I kind of glossed over it, that they had left and right autopilot systems, and they disabled the one that was working using the good data, and they continued to have it use the one that was getting the bad data.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I remember you saying that, but it didn't like click at that time.
It didn't click. Yeah. It's frustrating, Chris. Again, like we've talked about before, it seems like there's never one thing that goes wrong. Like, sure, you can say the radio altimeter was out, but there's like a series of decisions that happen that are bad that lead to getting to this point. And it's not only bad decisions, it's also like being inattentive or not paying attention to what's happening, not realizing speed is getting dangerously slow, not realizing the throttle's at idle. When they gave it half power again, not realizing it immediately rolled back.
Yeah. But there were three people doing this, right? I mean, there was someone just observing.
Right.
And none of them noticed?
No, yeah, exactly. It's frustrating. I don't know what to say. The safety pilot should have definitely noticed it. I mean, he did point out the radio altimeter was broken and the pilot confirmed, or the captain confirmed it, but then like no steps were taken to address it.
And he didn't mention the speed was low, right?
Yeah, eventually he mentions when the speed's low, but by that point they're like at a critical phase. Who's to say? Maybe if they had given it max power immediately instead of waiting 9 seconds, maybe they would have had enough time to pull out and initiate a go around. I don't know. Maybe you and I can get in like a flight simulator and try it out sometime and see what happens. Anyway, the Dutch Safety Board found issues with how the aircraft was handled by air traffic control, and the handling of the aircraft was not in accordance with ICAO regulations, the International Civil Aviation Organization. When on an ILS approach, the aircraft can be placed at an altitude between 1,000 and 3,000 feet. The altitude should match a distance from the runway threshold so the airplane intercepts the localizer below the glide path. This is what I was talking about earlier. Normally, you get that glide path from below. As laid down in the rules and instructions of air traffic control, the Netherlands interception of the localizer signal when approaching at 2,000 feet should occur at a minimum of 8 nautical miles from the runway threshold. So what they're saying here is they should be at 2,000 feet, 8 miles away from the airport, and hit that ILS from below. However, the rules allow for an aircraft to be lined up between 8 and 5 nautical miles from the runway threshold using a short turn that can be offered to ensure an efficient flow of traffic. In this instance, when an aircraft maintains an altitude of 2,000 feet, the localizer should be intercepted before 6.2 nautical miles is reached. If the alignment occurs between 5 and 6.2 nautical miles, the altitude given to the aircraft should be lowered. However, the heading that the crew were assigned by air traffic control made it so they intercepted the localizer at 5.5 nautical miles. Their current assigned altitude was 2,000 feet, resulting in them being about 170 feet above the glide path at interception. This resulted in higher workload for the crew since they had to lose the additional altitude to get them on the glide path, and they had less time to carry out the landing checklist. So all this is saying, that I know that's like a mouthful, that air traffic control vectored them so that they intercepted the localizer closer than they should have and from above, when, according to the rules, they should not be doing that.
Yeah, they came in a difficult way.
Yes, which gave the crew more work, which could explain maybe why they were distracted. Like they didn't have time to do their landing checklist.
It was like too much of a slam dunk.
Yeah, they're like Shaq. They broke it too hard. They broke the backboard.
That's actually an on point analogy, right?
Yeah. So I mean, they gave them this approach from above, but according to the book, they should not do that. When the aircraft was descending above Flevoland, and just after that, 3 landing gear configurations warnings were heard. Remember, I mentioned that the landing gear warning kept going off.
Oh yeah, because the plane thought they were landing.
Exactly. These warnings are not unusual during this phase of flight. Just after this, another 2 warnings were heard, first above 2,500 feet and the second at 2,000 feet. And the analysis of these warnings showed no radio height was displayed on the primary flight display of the captain at this time of the first warning, as is normal when the system operates correctly. A negative value of -8 feet was displayed at the time of the second warning, and the captain made the remark, radio altimeter, remember I said that? Between the second and third warning. So even back then, he knew that the radio altimeter was acting up. The information in the captain's primary flight display between the second and third warnings was not known with certainty. The analysis of the flight data recorder does not provide this information. But it's a pretty safe bet to say it was probably already showing -8 feet at that point, which was probably why the alarm was going off, telling them to put their gear down. And instead of dealing with it, he just kept hitting the silence button for that alarm so it would stop going off. So he knew that the radio altimeter was messed up. Like, he even made the comment, radio altimeter.
Ugh.
So like I mentioned, there were 2 autopilots, right? A left and a right side. And typically for Turkish Airlines, the crew should engage both autopilots for an ILS approach. In order to prepare the automatic flight system ready for use for an ILS approach, the first officer wanted to engage the left autopilot in addition to the right autopilot that was already engaged. So the right autopilot was on. The first officer wants to engage the left autopilot as well. In this case, however, the left autopilot had, due to the previous erroneous -8 feet height, had saved this height into its memory. So as a result, the left autopilot could not be engaged. According to the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder data, the crew did not attempt to engage both autopilots a second time and just continued with the right side autopilot. And this was okay. They were allowed to do this because the visibility was good enough. Like I said, they could still see. And it wasn't required for both to be engaged. The board believes that the landing gear configuration warnings and problems when activating autopilots could have been a reason for the crew to diagnose the problem, but no indication of this was found. So there are clear indications something's broken, but they're just not really digging into it. And it's just kind of like compounding the problem.
Well, yeah, they're just thinking about landing. Right. They're just like, oh, it's not working. Well, we'll just land.
We'll land. Right, exactly. When the stick shaker warning happened, there was an immediate reaction on the controls and the thrust levers were moved halfway forward. The board believes this was done by the first officer since he was the one flying, but the captain immediately made the call out that he had the controls. The board believes the first officer then took his hand off the throttles, and because the auto throttle was engaged, the levers went back to idle. Like I said, someone should have kept their hand on the throttle.
Yeah.
The auto throttle was immediately disengaged after this, but 7 seconds passed before the thrust levers were moved forward again.
And is this where it's like there's 2 throttles, right? If both pilots, just one of them could have kept it going, right?
Well, there's 2 throttles because there's one for each engine. It's not that there's like a throttle control for each pilot. It's just like there's 2 levers, one for the left engine, one for the right engine, and like one person puts their hand on both of them and moves them in unison.
Okay.
That's why we've talked about before, like asymmetric thrust. If one engine fails, you pull it back to idle, and then you just operate the working engine's throttle.
Okay.
Or if you need to give one a little more power than the other. We've talked about situations like that too. So when someone says they have the controls, you immediately let go and let them take control. Mm-hmm. So they're the ones who are going to fly the plane with the yoke, and they're the ones who are in charge of the throttle. So like when the captain says he has the controls, the first officer should absolutely be letting go and letting the captain take over. Maybe he should have kept an eye on it. He's still there as well. Maybe the safety pilot should have kept his eye on it. I don't know. Someone should have had their eye on it and reminded the captain, hey, put your hand on the throttle.
Yeah.
It has not been determined with certainty whether the captain had his hand on the thrust lever during this phase of flight when the aircraft's pitch position was decreased. So the report says they can't officially say if his hand was on it or not. In my opinion, if it was at idle, I would say it probably was not on there.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make any sense to me that if you have low airspeed and you're about to stall, that you wouldn't immediately give it max thrust. So the total, like we said earlier, the total time between activation of the stick shaker and the moving of the thrust levers to the position for maximum thrust was 9 seconds. The plane entered a stall situation between 400 and 450 feet, and the board determined this altitude was too low to recover from. However, after doing tests, it was determined that if they initiated recovery between 500 and 800 feet, and if they immediately put the thrust levers to max, they could have fully recovered the flight. So they were close. They were at 460 feet. Maybe they couldn't have recovered it if they had immediately gone to max power, but they're on the cusp. They might have. Who knows? So the Dutch safety board reached the following main conclusion. During the accident flight, while executing the approach by means of the instrument landing system with the right autopilot engaged, the left radio altimeter system showed an incorrect height of -8 feet on the primary flight display. This incorrect value of -8 feet resulted in activation of the retard flare mode of the auto throttle, whereby the thrust of both engines was reduced to a minimal value, approaching idle, in preparation for the last phase of the landing. Due to the approach heading and the altitude provided to the crew by air traffic control, the localizer signal was intercepted 5.5 nautical miles from the runway threshold, with the result that the glide slope had to be intercepted from above. This obscured the fact that the auto throttle had entered retard flare mode. Because if you think about it, I'll ad-lib for a bit here. If you think about it, this happened at the worst possible time. The plane entered this retard flare mode when they're above the localizer coming down to intercept it, so they would have to be decreasing their speed and losing altitude at the same time. So it would make sense for the throttle to go back. They just didn't realize that it wasn't going back to hit the localizer. It was going back because it thought they were about to touch down.
Oh, so like that's why they didn't notice it.
They didn't notice immediately. Right. They're like,
it was doing what it should have been doing, but it did it too much.
Correct. It's tough to try to like come down like that and bleed speed off at the same time. And they thought it was just part of the procedure, when in reality, it was just at idle because they thought they were about to touch down. In addition, it increased the crew's, they're talking about intercepting the localizer from above. In addition, it increased the crew's workload. When the aircraft passed 1,000 feet height, the approach was not stabilized, so the crew should have initiated a go-around. The right autopilot, using data from the right radio altimeter, followed the glide slope signal. As the airspeed continued to drop, the aircraft's pitch attitude kept increasing. The crew failed to recognize the airspeed decay and the pitch increase until the moment the stick shaker was activated. Subsequently, the approach to stall recovery procedure was not executed properly, causing the aircraft to stall and crash. So there's this, they talk about this thing when, you're flying a plane and when you're coming into land, you have to have a stabilized approach. Like everything has to be perfect. If you're not in a stabilized approach, you go around, you try it again. And I think we've talked about incidents like this before, where it's like even the one we did recently, the U.S. Bangla Airlines. Like if you're not lined up and everything's going just right, you're at the appropriate altitude, just go around, try it again. There's no harm in doing a go around.
Yeah.
And they were not stabilized.
Only time there was a harm in doing a go around was when they ran out of fuel.
Oh man, you're right.
It was. Was that the last episode we did?
That was the most recent episode, yes. So yeah, normally not a problem. You should never reach the point where you're going to run out of fuel. So that's a separate problem.
Yeah.
The Dutch Safety Board also reached the following sub-conclusions. The problems with the radio altimeter system in the Boeing 737-800 fleet had been affecting several airlines, including Turkish Airlines, for many years, were known to Boeing and the FAA. Several airlines, including Turkish Airlines, regarded the problems with the radio altimeter system as a technical problem rather than a hazard to flight safety. As a result, the pilots were not informed of this issue. It has become clear that the existing procedures, tests, and routines applied by several airlines, including Turkish Airlines, were not sufficient in order to resolve the problems with the erroneous radio altitude values. The investigation failed to find a single cause for the origin of the erroneous radio altitude values. So they don't even know why the values were messed up. If I remember right, in this specific incident, out of the 4 antennas, only one of them was not destroyed by the impact, and the one that they tested like it was operating fine. So presumably the one that was malfunctioning got destroyed in the impact, so they couldn't test it to figure out why it was broken. Due to the fact that the localizer signal was intercepted at 5.5 nautical miles from the runway threshold at an altitude of 2,000 feet, the glide slope had to be intercepted from above. As a result, the crew were forced to carry out a number of additional procedures, resulting in greater workload. This also caused the landing checklist to be completed during a later moment in the approach than standard operational procedures prescribed. Yeah, they were doing, by the way, we didn't even talk about that. They were doing this landing checklist way too late. This landing checklist should have been done way earlier. It's nuts that they didn't finish it. They were still at 500 feet and doing it. And when their decision altitude was 200, they should have been done with this way earlier. Again, that just speaks to the increased workload, and they were behind. The cockpit crew did not have information regarding the interrelationship between a failure of the left radio altimeter system and the operation of the auto throttle. Of all the available indications and warning signals, only a single indication referred to the incorrect auto throttle mode, namely the retard annunciation on the primary flight displays. So what that's saying is that they didn't know necessarily that this retard flare mode had been entered. Mm-hmm. The only indication they had was like on their display, there was a like one little section where it says retard in reference to the auto throttle.
That's wild that it doesn't, I don't know, show it more clearly.
You're right, but there are other symptoms, there are other indications, namely airspeed reduction, looking at the throttle levers and seeing that they're at idle. So even if you don't see that, and it's flashing yellow, by the way, it's not like it's just one thing, it's like a flashing yellow. And I believe also the airspeed indicator has a yellow line box around it that flashes at the same time, if I remember right. So it's subtle, but it's out of the ordinary. This does lead to greater questions about the best way for a computer system to get a person's attention without overloading them. Like, it gets really into like the user interface design of these systems. And, is this the best way to do it? Are there other better ways to do it? There's a lot to get into with that.
Yeah, I guess also a lot of times when it activates, it's activating in a way where it only does it when it's appropriate, right? So it's like you don't want to overwhelm with like warnings and da-da-da. It shouldn't be like flash, like screaming at you because it's...
Exactly, because normally it's what's supposed to happen right as you land. So that being said, the board also says that with the knowledge available to them at the time, the crew had no way of understanding the actual significance of these indications and warning signals and could not have been expected to determine the pending risk accurately. As a result of intercepting the glide slope from above, the incorrect operation of the auto throttle was obscured for the crew. The fact that the thrust levers were not immediately moved to their maximum thrust positions in accordance with the approach to stall recovery procedure indicates the crew were not sufficiently trained to deal with a situation of this type. Crew resource management and crew communications during the approach were not in accordance with the standard operating procedure of Turkish Airlines regarding cockpit communication. So again, bad communication, bad resource management kind of leads to these things.
Yeah.
So there are some recommendations, of course, as a result of this report. First one, it's not going to surprise you. Boeing should improve the reliability of the radio altimeter system. Number one. Cool. Good note. The FAA and European Aviation Safety Agency should ensure that the undesirable response of the auto throttle and flight management computer caused by incorrect radio altimeter values is evaluated and that the auto throttle and flight management computer is improved in accordance with the design specifications. So just make it a little more safe. Try to improve the auto throttle system. Mm-hmm. By the way, there's a few times in these coming recommendations I'm going to say EASA. That's the European Aviation Safety Agency. Boeing, FAA, and EASA should assess the use of an auditory low-speed warning signal as a means of warning the crew, and if such a warning signal proves effective, mandate its use. So again, kind of test out like an audible alarm that lets crew know if they're getting slow. Turkish Directorate General of Civil Aviation, ICAO, FAA, and EASA should change their regulations in such a way that airlines and flying training organizations see to it their recurrent training programs include practicing recovery from stall situations on approach. This is great. This is maybe the most dangerous thing that can happen is a stall on approach like this. Because like I said before, normally if you stall, you try to trade altitude for airspeed to try to kind of get your airflow over your wings to be more stable, to generate more lift. When you're low, you can't do that. Normally that's why they have stick shakers, stick pushers. They try to like push the nose down to get wind flowing or to get air flowing over the wings. When you're low, it's tough. You can't do that. FAA, EASA, and Turkish Directorate General of Civil Aviation should make renewed efforts to make airlines aware of the importance of reporting and ensure that reporting procedures are adhered to. Boeing should make renewed efforts to ensure that all airlines operating Boeing aircraft are aware of the importance of reporting. So again, I think they're kind of throwing Boeing a bone on this one, in my opinion, where they're like, well, not enough people told Boeing this was a problem. In my opinion, that's kind of shady.
Not enough people told Boeing that
people complained that the radio altimeters were breaking.
That's yeah.
I don't like. I get it. They want to make sure it's in writing. I feel like that kind of lets Boeing off the hook a little bit, in my opinion. Turkish Airlines should ensure that its pilots and maintenance technicians are aware of the importance of reporting. Again, reporting. We should all know that. Turkish Airlines should adjust its safety program. Netherlands Air Traffic Control should harmonize its procedures for the lineup of aircraft on approach as set out in the rules and instructions with ICAO procedures, and should also ensure that air traffic controllers adhere to the rules and instructions. So they kind of got mad at ATC for giving them a slam dunk approach into that ILS.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I like saving. Sometimes in some of these episodes, I like saving the juicy bit for the very end, and we're gonna get a little.
There's more.
We get a little juicy here at the end. So, like I said, I felt like some of these findings kind of let Boeing off the hook, right? Well, an investigation by the New York Times, Chris Hamby, which was published in January 2020 in the aftermath of the Boeing 737 MAX groundings, claimed that the Dutch Safety Board either excluded or played down criticisms of the manufacturer in its 2010 final report after pushback from a team of Americans that included Boeing and federal safety officials who said that certain pilot errors had not been properly emphasized. The Hamby article draws on a 2009 human factors analysis by Sidney Decker, which was not published by the DSB until after the New York Times investigation was published. In February 2020, Boeing reportedly refused to cooperate with a new Dutch review on the crash investigation, and that the NTSB had refused Dutch lawmakers' request to participate.
What?
So it seems to me like Boeing and the FAA tried to push an agenda here to keep it from looking like Boeing had any culpability in this incident, right?
Or at least not as much.
Business. Right. And it's not until after the MAX groundings that a reporter goes through and starts looking and realize, hey, you know what? There's some things are a little shady here. And then, the Dutch want to reinvestigate it, and Boeing and the NTSB say they're not going to do it.
Wow. They're like, nope.
Yeah, they're like, no, we already did that one. We're not going to revisit it.
I mean, why wouldn't they? I mean, that's uncommon, right? Like if they're like, hey, we think there's some
I would think that in their minds, they don't want to. What they would say is they don't want to waste the resources and money reinvestigating something that's already settled.
But they're not reinvestigating. They're saying a third party wants to investigate, right?
Right, but they still need the Dutch lawmakers are still requesting Boeing and the NTSB to cooperate, and they're just refusing to do it.
But can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely, because the report's done. In their minds, it's done. There's no need to revisit it. Of course, you and I, we've in this podcast, we've talked about other times where incidents are revisited and reopened. Mm-hmm. If I had to make a prediction and a guess, I would say that this is definitely going to be reinvestigated.
Oh, you think this is like not done?
Oh, I don't think this is done. We're treating it as done, because like I said, the investigation is officially done. I'm going to bet that at some point down the road, they're going to have to. They're going to be made to answer for this.
And what year? When did this request get denied? What year?
This was in February 2020. It was only 2 years ago. This is very recent.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Sometimes I forget. It just seems like we always talk about stuff so far in the past that was right before COVID.
Right. I bet COVID slowed down the process. But I bet within the next 5 years we're going to start to see more information on this.
Ooh, this is going to be like. Is this going? Because if they are like trying to hide this and downplay it, then it
could be bad.
That's some like corruption. That's
right, and we've seen this before. Remember when there was the gentleman's agreement about the cargo doors, like
about
this
the
kind
doors
of stuff
not locking correctly,
right?
Like we'll just issue a suggestion or fix thing rather than like an actual
rather than actually doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's still out there. Again, that's just my opinion. I don't know that with any certainty. I'm not a pilot. I don't work for the NTSB. I don't work for the FAA. It just seems like this wasn't as thorough as it should have been. But that's it for Turkish Airlines 1951. Luckily, the best thing you could say about this is it could have been way worse. Almost everyone on that plane survived the impact, but totally avoidable, which is awful.
I assume the plane was totaled, right?
Oh, yeah. The plane broke apart into 3 pieces.
Yeah.
I'll post some photos of that on social media if you go check us out at Black Box Down Pod. Since this was so recent, there's a lot of actual footage and video and photos of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's probably is
there's quite a bit. All right, but that's it. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back again next week with another episode.
Oh, we have our friends have a new podcast that you should check out. We posted a trailer in our feed.
Ship Hits the Fan,
which is they cover nautical boat disasters, and it's really funny.
I would say maritime
disasters.
It's really funny. I've when they were working on it, I listened to the first episode, and tried to they asked me to give notes. I felt like, who am I? Like I'm not qualified to do that. But I give them some suggestions, which they probably didn't need. Those guys are over at Funhouse are so funny.
Yeah,
and you should check it out. Just search for Ship Hits the Fan wherever you listen to podcasts. By the time this episode comes out, I don't know how many are going to be out. When we're recording this, only the first episode's out so far. But yeah, go.
Tell Black Box Down sent you.
Black Box Down sends its regards. All right. Thanks for listening.
Bye.